was nice. Rob Sampson, state senator from Wolcott. First day of the legislative session, and we get him right here to report on it for us. Hello there, Rob. Thanks for being here.
Hello there, Todd. No one is safe. The Connecticut legislature is back in session.
So what's your first reaction that you want to share with us?
It's hard to say what this year is going to turn into at the state capitol. I mean, we went through the normal pomp and circumstance today. We had a short session in the House and Senate. Everybody got to get up and, make their speeches and introduce their first selectmen and, their neighbors and the people that sprung them into the office, et cetera. And we went around the room doing that. And then we heard from the governor who made his annual speech. There's a lot of confusion, by the way, in the media, Todd, because people are thinking that we're doing a budget. And in fact, we're not doing a budget. The budget is done every other year, and it's always done in the first year of the biennium. So the budget was completed last year. What we're doing this year is an adjustment to that budget. And of course, an adjustment is required because they never get it right the first time around. And they never want to give up an opportunity to spend more money. So if, the details of what's transpiring afford them the opportunity, you can bet they're going to do it. And of course, the governor's got lots of new ways to spend your money.
And it's already up, I would assume, from because it goes up a few points every year, right?
More than a few points. Yeah, I mean, the Democrats and sadly a great many Republicans supported last year's budget, and I know I've been on talking with you before about it, and they advertised that there was a tax cut, and there was a minor tax cut to the income tax for a couple of lower income brackets. But overall, the budget spends 9% more than the previous budget cycle.
Yikes.
$3+ billion. So everyone's paying more taxes, including those people that are going to get a nominal income tax cut. I mean, they might save a few bucks at the end of the year.
So the people who are saving their $25 a month or whatever Ned said it was today, or paycheck, $25 per paycheck, they're actually paying hundreds of dollars more in taxes.
They will certainly pay more in other taxes across the board everywhere. And I doubt that anyone's going to save $25 per paycheck unless they're being paid monthly.
Yeah, well, that could be. Some people do that. But he was throwing that number around. I forget what the time period was. I could be misquoting. The interesting thing, though, is just that the budget is always going up. And the person who we hired to manage the budget and tell us the truth about what's going on so we can understand is actually trying to deceive us all the time about what goes on with the budget. He wants us to think because of that little tax cut that some people are getting, that reflects a reduction in overall costs. And that's not anywhere near the case, which you're outlining for us.
It's not even remotely true. I mean, it also, tries to convince people that somehow we're trimming back on government. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. I mean, the governor is looking for ways to spend money in almost every area in state government. I mean, included in this budget adjustment, not even an actual proper budget, just an adjustment to kind of tweak around the edges. He's announcing a program to spend $650 million to pay down people's medical debt. And of course, that's people who actually pay their bills are going to be contributing to tax money to pay down the medical debt of other folks. There's the baby bonds program, which is, a program to effectively create welfare for people that aren't even born yet, essentially. There's expansion upon expansion. There is no talk up there about reducing the size or scope of government or the government workforce or shrinking, how much we spend in any area. It's just more and more and more. And they've been enabled in large part by the federal government dumping money into the state. You might hear people referring to something called ARPA money. That's the American Rescue Plan Act. That's the money that came in the wake of the pandemic that a lot of blue states were on the receiving end. The state of Connecticut got billions of dollars. That's thousands of millions, I heard a little while ago. Absolutely correct. And that's thousands of millions of taxpayer dollars that are sent to the federal government that are making their way back to Connecticut. But I can tell you, Todd, if it wasn't for that money, the state of Connecticut would be in such unbelievable debt right now based on the fiscal mismanagement of Governor Ned Lamont and the Democrats. They have done nothing good other than spend taxpayer money. I'm not saying that it's good, but that's all they've done is just continue to grow government and expand how much taxes we're all paying, and for the purpose of creating a dependent state that they can use to manipulate during election time.
And to make up ridiculous stories to convince us that this is all wonderful, that all we need in life is an expanded government every single year. But if you expand government every single year, doesn't that by necessity, if you think it through, that means you're eventually going to do a Thelma and Louise and just drive right off the cliff.
Yeah, you would think so. I mean, at some point, the money is going to run out. But, these folks are state lawmakers. They serve relatively short terms. They don't look at the long-term ramifications of what they're doing. They look only at, what they've got to do to get through this next budget cycle or the next 2 years to the next election. And they've all been saved. The Democrats were completely, utterly saved by the pandemic and the money coming from the federal government. Otherwise, they would be looking very, very terrible. I remember, the reason why Governor Malloy was elected, I think, really had a lot to do with the fact that we were in a very, very bad budget crunch. And a lot of people blamed it on the Republican administrations that preceded Malloy, even though it was really the fact that the Democrats controlled the legislature even then. But we would have been back in that same position. And instead, he's allowed to, walk around smelling like roses. And I'm very dismayed by Republicans who seem to think that this is all okay. They're, in fact, enabling the move towards progressive socialism. And they're also enabling their own destruction, because as government grows and more people become dependent, the Democrat Party is going to gain more power and influence, and Republicans will begin to disappear.
We're talking to State Senator Rob Sampson from Wolcott. That point is a really cogent one that doesn't get made very often. That is that Republicans elected officials, their tendency in the state is to look at how overwhelmed they are in terms of their influence and to think the best thing for them to do is to sound like Democrats when they talk public policy, but maybe highlight some incremental difference that causes them to object. But it seems to me it's the opposite, that they're blowing the opportunity to differentiate themselves, to explain how much government is growing each year and how dangerous that is and how burdensome it is for average people going to work every day to carry that weight.
Absolutely. And Todd, I cannot thank you enough for what you do on the radio every day to expose what's going on in our state and federal government, and for giving people like myself a platform to let your listeners know that there are a handful of us, and sadly it is just a handful, that actually do stand firmly on conservative Republican principles. We fight for them every day, and we don't apologize for it. People are concerned that, we have this talk of the uniparty and the, Republicans are becoming more and more like Democrats. And nobody is more concerned about that than me, because my belief is that when you get elected as a Republican, you should be fighting to further the Republican agenda, to explain why our worldview of small government, protecting the freedoms of the constituents that you represent, and fiscal responsibility and everything else that goes with being a small government American Republican. You're supposed to fight for those things, win, lose, or draw, because we're trying to make more people who believe in those things. But instead, there's a lot of Republicans who are elected who are more concerned with simply winning the election rather than winning the battle of ideas. And if you win an election by, moderating your position or sounding like the Democrats, you're failing to do what you're supposed to be doing. You're not making more Republicans, and in effect, you are making sure that there will be fewer in the future. And that's what we argue behind closed doors about a lot up in Hartford. But thank you for the opportunity to at least voice that concern here, and hopefully your listeners will take that to their own representatives.
But isn't it a mistake to put it in terms of these are Republican values? This is just obvious that it's not good to squander huge amounts of money and to continually grow the size of government when Connecticut is arguably the most expensive state, the most highly taxed state in the country. It's nuts to continue to expand. And any responsible governor and any responsible member of the legislature would say, hold on now, let's back off a little bit, because we're jumping several billion dollars from one year to the next, or one budget cycle to the next.
Absolutely. And again, these are American principles. I say they're Republican principles because that's why I identify as a Republican, because I believe that the Republican Party is the last place there's anybody that shares those values, the complete Democrat Party across the nation. I mean, when I was first elected, Todd, in 2010, there may have been some moderate Democrats that were fiscally sane and wanted to have at least some common sense in the way we craft our budgets and run our state government. But they're gone. It's the Democrat Party is completely overtaken by people that are more aptly named socialist, progressive, communist, whatever.
Yes. But I mention it because it requires that you have to defend a brand other than common sense and the best interests of the people. Because some people will have successfully been propagandized and will think, oh, Republican, that's bad, so I can't support Rob Sampson because he represents Republican values. But Republican values are to be responsible with the dollars of taxpayers, and you have to then start explaining the connection between doing the obvious best thing and identifying with the Republican Party. And that's hard for some people to figure. So it just seems, it complicates it a little bit.
No kidding. It's the greatest frustration that I deal with, which is that my own party does not stand by the principles that we claim to espouse.
Yes.
And that, constantly people are frustrated. I mean, I listen to your show. I listen to other radio and TV, and people are calling in, and they're frustrated across the board with politicians generally. They're frustrated across the board with government, and they're frustrated with Republicans not standing on Republican principles. So I have to work extra hard to make the distinction that I'm not one of those people. I'm actually somebody who agrees with those folks who's fighting for their values. But you're right. It is tremendously frustrating, but I've got little choice. What am I going to do? I mean, in order to compete in our political environment, you've got to choose one side or the other.
Oh, well, you could just say, Rob Sampson, protecting the money in your pocket.
Yeah, I would love to do that, except that the rules of the game, the way we raise money, the way people identify which, political
the binary, I know.
Often is by the binary, which is not so terrible, Todd. If the binary was legitimate and the Republican Party stood by its principles, for me, I am forever trying to prop up and repair the Republican Party, because I believe the only way to get our state and country on the proper course is to defeat the Democrats. And, you could come up with a lot of, ways to do that maybe, but I think the easiest and most effective way is to have a strong Republican Party that is a true opposition party that actually believes in the things that I'm describing today. And we stood together, arm in arm and fought the Democrats. Now, we're a long way from that. But there are people across the state working towards that goal, and I'm one of them.
Well, that's good, and it's honorable, and it's wonderful, and I hope you succeed, because it would be good to have a stronger Republican Party, one that had so much strength that even people elected to office under the Republican banner would support the values that the name is supposed to represent. Absolutely. But we're fighting against the Democrats, and the Democrats are very clever. They're smart. I can just think of a few things that are in the news these days. You have this, the issue with the tampon dispensers that get ripped off the wall in Brookfield. And, of course, that was a big issue in my hometown of Woolkit, because that's the first place they were installed in the state. And people went bananas when it happened, and rightfully so. But you see how they operate. The Democrats will try and say that somebody like me, who is opposed to the placement of these tampon dispensers in boys' bathrooms in grade 3, for example, that somehow I'm bigoted or I'm you're hateful. But don't you think people see that the tide is turning? I think on the understanding that the reality is that the Democrats are trying to disrupt our social order by messing around with the most obvious things. Nobody in their right mind thinks that there should be tampons in the men's room. And you probably get 95% support for that.
Yeah, amen to that. And again, this is I brought it up because I think it's a case where the Democrats trying to use their very clever narrative of saying, well, if you're against this, then you're a bigot. You're actually against freedom, when in fact it's the opposite. I'm all for people living the way they choose, but I'm not in favor of using the public school system as a mechanism to advance a progressive, in my mind, insane cultural battle. But you're right. This is a case where they have overreached, and it's a place where we should highlight it. But I've got to convince my Republican colleagues that it's a good issue for us, that it's a case where we can point out that they've overreached.
Mm. Well, I would vote with you on that. Thank you, Rob Sampson. We're out of time. It's always great to talk with you, but particularly today because it's the first day of the session, and you sound so fired up. It's wonderful.
I'm raring to go. Can't wait to get in there and fight.
Thank you, Rob. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks so much, Todd. Take it easy.
Bye-bye.